Our military hero of the month is Master Sergeant Roy P. Benavidez, Congressional Medal of Honor winner. This month marks the 57th anniversary of Sergeant Benavidez's actions in Vietnam. It is still an amazing story of heroism and dedication that needs to be retold. Nearly 60 years after his exploits, military fans are calling him the real Rambo. Roy was a native son of the Crossroads. He was born in Cuero in 1935, but after both of his parents died of tuberculosis, Roy went to live with his grandfather, aunt, and uncle and extended family in El Campo. Times were hard back then, and there were many mouths to feed. Roy found himself doing little odd jobs like shining shoes and picking cotton. At the age of 15, he dropped out of school and went to work full-time to help the family.
I needed that education and learn the skill. So I was accepted into the regular army. Then I heard about airborne. I heard about that extra pay that you get for jumping out of airplanes.
Soon thereafter, Roy applied and was accepted to the 5th Special Forces. Special Forces were known as the Green Berets during the Vietnam era, and at this point, Roy was part of an elite team of highly trained soldiers, exactly where he wanted to be. The Rangers were called in for very sensitive operations, usually behind enemy lines. In 1965, Roy was on a solo reconnaissance mission in Vietnam. He was out to gather intelligence on the Viet Cong troops. It was at this moment that he stepped on a landmine. Roy was evacuated and wound up at the Fort Sam Medical Center. There he was told his legs were so damaged that he would never walk again. Roy was not happy with his prognosis, and as he lay in his hospital bed, he saw the news about how the nation was turning against the Vietnam War. He vowed to walk again and pushed himself into strenuous rehab to get back on his feet. Benavidez walked out of the hospital in 1966, determined to return to combat in Vietnam. 57 years ago, Roy went through what has been described as his 6 hours in hell. While at a forward operating base, he heard the desperate call over the radio. A 12-man Ranger squad was in trouble. They were surrounded by over 1,000 Viet Cong, and they were taking heavy casualties. Without orders, Roy picked up a medical bag and ran to the closest helicopter on duty. When he arrived at the location, he jumped out of the helicopter and ran to support his dead and wounded buddies. Under withering fire and grenades, Roy began to haul every one of his comrades to an evacuation zone. He received numerous bullet wounds, but he never stopped. At one point, an enemy soldier clubbed him on the head and stabbed him with his bayonet. Benavidez pulled the bayonet out of his body, drew out his own knife, and killed the attacker. He kept going, leaving the knife in the soldier's body. An evacuation helicopter arrived at the scene, but as Benavidez loaded the wounded comrades, the helicopter pilot was killed and the helicopter crashed to the ground. He went back into the firefight to recover the body of the commanding officer and the important papers that were in his satchel. Benavidez collapsed from his injuries when he arrived at the helicopter with his commanding officer. The medics just managed to get his body on board. When the doctors saw his condition, they assumed he was dead. They placed him in a body bag, and at that moment, he was able only to spit in the doctor's face to show that he was alive. He had 37 wounds. Sergeant Roy recuperated and continued to work in the Army. But of all his medals, he didn't have the Medal of Honor. It turned out there was no eyewitness still alive who was at the scene of the battle to report on Roy's actions. But it wasn't until 1980 when an article about Roy's actions appeared in the El Campo Leader newspaper. The story was later picked up by the Associated Press and distributed worldwide. One veteran soldier, retired on the island of Fiji, read the story and finally put the story together in his mind. He was one of the soldiers that Roy had rescued on that fateful day. He got a hold of Roy's phone number in El Campo and called, and they remembered the entire story of 6 hours in hell.
You know, there's a saying among us veterans that it is those that have fought for it, that life has a special flavor that the protector will never know. You have never lived till you almost died. And it is us veterans, especially the wounded, that pray for peace most of all, because we have to suffer the wounds of war.
Today we remember Master Sergeant Roy P. Benavidez, native son of the Crossroads. If you have a veteran and you want to tell us their story, please let us know. Go to crossroadstoday.com/military hero. I'm Maclovio Perez, 25 News Now.